Some of you are asking why chord tones are even important. You might have been playing music for a while and you've never heard of this term and you're doing just fine. And there's many people that can do that. However, what I want to do is share with you why I feel that learning to play by using chord tones will make you a better all-around musician, no matter what you play. And the reason why chord tones will help you so much is because it's a change in mindset. Change on mindset of how you approach playing music. And this is especially true when you're having to improvise and come up with notes on the fly. This is a great example of this is when you play lead guitar. A lead guitar player needs to be thinking about what they're going to play rather than how they're going to play it. What parts are they going to come up with? If there's a solo, how are they going to come up with the notes they're going to use in the solo? And so there's a kind of an approach to how most musicians would approach playing things like that. And what I want to do is I want to write this down because basically there are two different ways, two different approaches or mindsets on how people play what they do. Let me write this. Playing to the key is one of them. But the other side here, let me draw this line here because I think most everybody plays using one of these two methods. The other side is what I call playing to the chord. So there's playing to the key and there's playing to the chord. So let me tell you the differences in these two approaches. So playing to the key would look like this. You're playing a song and the song's in the key of G. So you know from your musical training, well, the song's in G major, so I can use either a G pentatonic scale or I can use a G major scale, and I'll just kind of noodle around and I'll find some notes that work with the chords that are playing. But basically, playing to the key, you're not really thinking about what the chords are. You're only thinking about the key. So most of this, let me write this down. You're playing using scales. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with playing to the key. The truth is, you're going to need to play to the key, but if you can play to the chord as well, that's going to be even better because you can do both of these things, which I think all the great players know how to do. So most of the time, playing to the key means you're playing to scales. Another way of playing to the key is, this is how I was introduced to playing lead guitar, is you just learn licks in a certain key. So in A minor for rock, let's say, you just learn 100 licks. And licks are basic like musical phrases that are little melodies that are kind of chopped up, and they're the building blocks to create like a solo. And whenever you're in the key of A minor, then you would use those licks and try to link them together to come up with something that sounds cool. Once again, though, here, let me write this, licks. Once again, all you're really thinking about is the key. You're not thinking about the chords underneath it. But what you find is, if you've ever done this before, that when you use scales or licks, depending on where you are in the chord progression, those licks will fit. Sometimes they won't fit. The scales will sound good. Sometimes they won't sound so good. Sometimes they'll sound bad using the right scales. And there's so many people who know tons of scales, but it never really sounds like how the pros play. And that's because there is more to just improvising than using scales and licks to playing to the key. There's another element to playing to the key. So I'm going to write this down. Sometimes you can use the right scales and licks, but it'll sound like those notes are mistakes. And if you ever have played in front of people, playing a sour note is a very, very scary thing. And it can cripple a lot of musicians because you're not sure if those notes are going to fit. And you know, you're just kind of gambling and praying and hoping that you hit the right notes at the right time. And it's kind of like playing Minesweeper, that Windows game where you're just hoping you don't click on the button where a bomb is, you know, before it'll blow up. And so there's advantages to playing to the key, but there are some disadvantages, like the mistakes part, and also that sometimes they just don't sound like it's fitting well. That's when chord tones come in. Because when you play using chord tones, you're moving into this area, this side, this mindset, how you approach your playing. You're playing to the chord. This means you are aware of every chord you're playing over. So you're not just thinking of the key, you're thinking about every chord, and not only every chord in the song or the progression, but you're thinking about when those chords change. So what happens is a different approach all of a sudden takes place. So now you're looking at every chord and when they change, and your goal is to hit the notes of that chord, which are the chord tones. Remember, chord tones just means the tones that make up the chord as the chords change. So a great way of thinking about playing to the chord is it's almost like target practice. We also call this target notes. So anytime a chord changes, there are new target notes that belong to that new chord you're going to. And what happens when you hit those target notes as the chords change, the notes sound like they fit perfectly because the chords that are being played will match the note that you play. So it sounds like you actually know what you're doing. The other great thing about this is if you learn to do this correctly, you will never make a mistake as far as hitting the wrong note. Because by definition, the chord tones over those chord changes, are the right notes. And this is important, especially when the song that you're playing goes beyond the simplistic, the chord progression theory, where there's 1, 4, 5 chords are major, 2, 3, and 6 are minor, 7 is diminished. A lot of the songs that we hear on the radio and in worship only use those songs, but there are just as many songs that go outside of those basic chords. And as soon as a song or a progression uses chords outside of that progression theory, these scales and even these licks won't fit all the time, depending on which note and depending on which chord. And that's where playing to the chord has its huge advantages, because you're actually playing your notes and choosing the notes that you play, chord fragments, every little piece of any little thing that you're playing on your instrument is completely planned out to fit the chord that it's going to. And so it's just going to allow you to play a much broader range of styles in music. In rock, a lot of rock just play to the key. And that's why guitar players who learn to play to the key are used to this, and they're really not exposed to playing to the chord because, that's kind of a way guitar players have always done it. but even the greatest guitar players who don't know about playing to the chord, I guarantee you know subconsciously when chords move to a certain chord, even if they're using scales, they'll use the right notes in the scale. Or if, let's say, a great example is like in blues, which you're using 1, 4, 5, but they're all dominant chords. And, the minor pentatonic scale, which normally is used for blues, won't always fit the chord tones of the 4 and 5 chords. And so playing to the chord allows you to get more color and allows you to be a lot more educated, I guess. Yes, that's a great word, in how you approach playing. So your mindset changes. Here's another thing too I wanted to say about these target notes. Some styles of music like jazz, they don't really, they use scales, but they use the chromatic scale. That means they use all the notes. And what matters is these target notes. And a lot of licks, even for jazz, are created using chord tones and using chromatic notes. So it kind of goes outside of scales. As long as it hits those target notes, it's going to sound like it fits and sound actually better for certain styles than just sticking to one scale or sticking to a few licks. So that is why chord tones are so important. Ultimately, you want to be able to blend these two approaches or mindsets on how you approach playing music together to be able to create, just endless ideas and creativity in how you play. The one tricky thing about chord tones and learning to play chord tones, because you're not used to doing this probably, is it does take a lot of time training yourself to play this way. But as long as you take baby steps and you keep at it and you keep things simple in the beginning, pretty soon this will be just as easy as playing to the key.